Welcome to the How to Buy or Sell a Business Successfully podcast. The concepts discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only. No attorney-client relationship is intended or formed by this podcast. No legal advice is intended in the substance of this podcast. Feel free to check out our website, www.goforemanlaw.com. Enjoy the show and welcome your hosts, Jake Wayman and Sam Foreman. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We want to help you buy or sell a business successfully. We're in an initial series of about 12 episodes, providing an overview of how deals work and covering some key concepts. We just talked about how much your deal could cost and what are some things that drive that cost. Today, we're going to talk about how to get the most value out of your deal budget. But first, let me introduce my colleague here, Jacob Wayman. Or rather, Jacob, why don't you introduce yourself? You do it way better than I do, as with most things.
I think my 30-second changes every time I get on here, so it's who am I today? My name's Jake Wayman. My wife and I are the owners of the Orange Theory Fitness Studios here in Wichita, and I also serve as an employee benefits consultant, helping employers in the area navigate the health insurance space. And then I love Wichita and love being a community advocate.
My name is Sam Foreman. I'm a business attorney here in Wichita. Our firm serves clients in the Kansas and Missouri region. I love working with folks buying or selling businesses. I have 2 children, both under the age of 5. And let me tell you, folks, it is a full spectrum of emotions on a daily basis. My favorite thing that I've done with my kids recently is, I talked about this on the last one, but I'm going to talk about it again, is go to the pumpkin patch, which was very windy, which was great, but getting to chase my kids around there for a couple hours was really good exercise. Almost as good as going to Orange Theory, but not quite. So want to recap a couple of key points on what drives deal cost. As we talked about on the last episode, the complexity of the deal, the size of the deal, the relationships, how many key terms are out there. Those are a couple of things that really drive it. What are the time pressures? What are the key points that are out there that have to be navigated? And so understanding those up front is really important so that you can help your team give you accurate estimates on what the cost range could be. Today, I want to talk about some tips to get the most value out of your deal budget. One of the things we encourage folks to think about as they're doing their deals is focus on value first and budget second. And that's something that has taken me a while to get used to as a business owner when we choose our service providers. But it's something that I've seen make a big impact is when we focus on value first, we always get more out of it. Budget's still important. It's got to be a close second, but making sure that those things work properly and that we're focused on value, because at the end of the day, that's what we want to take home, is we want to take home the value that's created in a transaction.
Yeah, I mean, on that, I think is when you focus on value, your budget's actually going to be surprisingly less. So I think if you focus on getting the most value of all the players on it, you'll actually find you're going to spend less money on the full scope of the deal.
Yeah.
I know it's not true for all of them, but it's something that you'll find that you get more value out of it.
Yeah, I think there's an old joke among lawyers, and it's probably at least partly a self-serving joke, but I'm going to tell it anyway, which is if you want an expensive attorney, go find a cheap one. But particularly when you're doing deals, you want to make sure you've got somebody who's on your team in whatever role they're in, who really knows their stuff, who's going to be able to create a lot of value for you, but also has enough familiarity that they're going to be able to do it in a reasonable amount of time. Because for most of us, we're working on an hourly basis, and if there's somebody that can do it in half the time at twice the rate, it's the same cost. So just keeping track of some of those things is important. Maximize the value of your time. We talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but remembering that you're the person who creates the most value, the most dollars per hour of anybody else on your team, and remembering that and prioritizing how you structure your deal and how you plan for your deal so that you're able to capitalize on the value of your own time, because nobody else is going to be able to make those key decisions. If you're on the buy side, nobody else is going to be able to step into your shoes and make the integration work correctly. If you're on the sell side, nobody else knows where the bodies are buried. If you really do have bodies buried, please please seek professional help. But really, really remember that as you're going through the process. Jacob, that was something I thought in your deal process you did a really terrific job of doing. You really used your team well. You really, had a plan in place at the beginning to make sure that things ran smoothly, and I thought that worked really, really well.
Well, and I'll be honest. The reason why we made a successful deal out of that, and the ones that have preceded that one, is I went to a lot of people who've done it before me and asking advice.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's where if you want to really maximize the value of your deal budget, is go seek guidance from people who've been through it before. Take them out for a cup of coffee, and they will sit there and let you know like things to avoid, things to pursue, lots of different stuff. There's a lot of people out there that have went through this process before you.
No, that's great. And, there's a lot of really great advice, from folks who've been through the deal process before that'll help you make your dollars work harder for you. And I think that's an important approach, especially for folks that are doing deals where, they may feel like, well, this is just a mom and pop business. What do I really have that I'm selling, or what do I really have that I'm buying? But making those dollars really work for you is, one way of thinking about it is you want to think less about how can I save $5,000 to $10,000 on doing this deal, and more about how can I make this $5,000 or $10,000 turn into $100,000 to $200,000 for me.
Yep.
So that it really works properly for you. Plan enough time to allow for managing the process. That's another key piece where people get their dollars to work really hard for them, is where they've created enough margin in the process so that they can manage it effectively around their priorities to create as much value as possible. When things are too rushed, you don't get time to sleep on it. You don't get time to think, oh my goodness, what about this? What about that? You need that time to sleep on it so that you can make those dollars work really hard for you. And then make a budget at the start. Really planning and organizing at the beginning, talking to your professional team, the folks that are going to be paid in that transaction, and making sure that they've given you an idea of things, and talk to them about some of those cost drivers. Make a list of those up front and tell them, hey, I'm really concerned about this relationship, or I'm really concerned about these points. How is that going to impact the budget on this, so that you've got as much transparency? Or they can come up with creative ways to be like, well, let's just take that off the table altogether.
Well, I think that's whether either the seller or the buyer, you need to look yourself as the quarterback, and and it's being open and honest with those conversations ahead of time, and talk price. Talk what it's going to cost to use a legal team, an accounting team, whatever, and talk about it, because you want that to be an open, like you mentioned in a previous podcast was about relationships, and I mean, it's making sure that you are having those conversations, because if you don't talk about budgets early on, and then you get slapped with a big old bill and you're like, where did this come from? And but that conversation never happened. I mean, that's on you. You need to be the one to have that conversation. Yeah, no, absolutely. Ensure that your deal team, as you have those conversations, make sure that they've got a clear understanding of the scope of work. You want to make sure that there's a lot of transparency around, hey, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm not doing. Here's what I want you to be doing, here's what I don't want you to be doing. Let's have conversations as we're going through, so that you can manage that as effectively as possible. When it kind of goes back to on the timeline discussion that we had a few episodes ago, was, if you have a time parameters on there, that's going to make sure you focus on the most important things, and having that conversation with your legal counsel is what's important, what's not important. This is what we need to focus on. This is not what we focus on, because, as like your legal advisor, they're there to protect you, and they want to do whatever they can to protect you. And so you need to let them know what things matter to you. Right. Yeah. And make sure they understand your risk tolerance in that process. Because you're never going to get a perfect deal. Nope. Well, there was this one time. No, you're never going to get a perfect deal. But really good process almost always creates really good results. Yep. And having those conversations, creating that clarity, creating good space to make those decisions, it all makes a big difference for you. We talked about this already. Make sure your team's giving you budget ranges, and make sure that it's a range. Give them enough information to give you good quality information, and then make sure that they're providing you a range. It's never an exact amount unless they're doing it on a flat fee, which if you are dealing with someone who's doing it on a flat fee, I want to caution you on something this complex with taking that approach. Because there's so many moving pieces here. You want to make sure, again, think value first, budget second, that they're going to be doing the things that achieve the most value for you out of the deal.
because that's what you ultimately want to take home at the end of the day, is as much value as you possibly can.
Yep.
And that applies to all of your service providers. That applies to all of your service providers. One of the folks that I've seen gotten paid, more than really, actually, they've gotten paid more than anybody else on a deal I've ever worked with. But my God, they created more value than anybody else I've ever worked with. And so thinking value first, budget second. Be really, really good with relationships. Man, I can't beat this drum enough. Take care of relationships in the deal process. This is something, Jake, that you've always done a really good job with. You're great with people, you're great with relationships, and it always has had, I think, a positive impact on how well deals go. And every deal that I've worked on, whether it's with you or somebody else that's really good with relationships, is when people are really good with relationships, it always produces more value in the process. Whether it's because somebody is less suspicious of a term, so they argue about it less, which reduces your legal spend, or somebody is more accommodating with a request, whatever it is, it always produces more value when people are good with relationships. What are some of the things that you found most helpful in taking good care of relationships, regardless of what aspect of your business or what deal it is?
I think it goes back on, communication, being over communicating with people, letting them know what's going on, being transparent, but it's being honest and just being authentically you. And I can't say this enough, but just thanking people.
Yeah.
Even as a simple, say you're requesting a documentation from the seller or from somebody else, and just in the email, being cordial with it, good afternoon, and just, being a human being, basically, instead of just demanding things. Hey, we need this document tomorrow. It's like, you gotta, those small little touches matter so much, because it's those small little things that just make us human.
Yeah, no, be a good human. That's, not to trivialize it, but it makes such a difference. We were on a deal recently where we were having a lot of difficulty with one of the other parties, and the fracture of trust that created, added substantially to the difficulty of getting the deal done, added substantially to the expense that was involved. Fortunately, it wasn't because our client was being a bad human. It was because somebody else was, whatever it was, we worked through it, but it always makes a big difference. It always makes a big difference, and a big positive difference. Take good care of those relationships, and making sure, we live in an email heavy world, a text heavy world, making sure that there's enough, verbal touch points, hopefully in-person touch points with folks.
Yeah.
Even if it's over Zoom, so that there's enough of a relationship and enough of the nonverbal communication. The worst thing about emails, it's so easy, especially in a high pressure deal, to read all the negative things into an email response, even if somebody doesn't mean that. And if you've laid enough of a foundation in that personal relationship with folks, that they're going to hear your voice, they're going to hear the relationship that you have with them through that. Their initial response isn't going to be like, oh man, I wonder why he doesn't trust me. It's going to be, oh, I think he probably wants this thing. I'm not clear on this. Let me just give him a call. Which always leads to better results.
Absolutely.
Last thing I have is something for which you are the poster child. Be really, really organized. Get the most out of your deal budget. Be really, really organized. So what were some of the things you did that really helped you stay organized in your deal?
Oh, for me, it was, that's a great question. I'm trying to remember, think about what it took for me to get organized.
Your legendary binders? Those are the binders.
Yeah, that's actually true. Yeah. I'm meticulous about making sure I know where timelines are at, and understanding where the project's at, who needs to be notified on certain things. And, I probably have a process to it that I do intuitively, but it's just, it's understanding that every part of the deal is important, even though if it may seem not important, it's important.
Yeah.
And it's putting all those pieces in place and being able to know and recognize that, and, asking a lot of questions. that is where it's going to come down. Being organized, you just having more of a understanding of what's actually happening in the deal, and, staying apprised of it, is just it's going to it's going to make the deal go a lot smoother.
No, that's terrific. The more engaged you are, the more you understand what's going
Yep.
on, the more you have the information you need to make really wise business decisions to
Yep.
maximize the value of your deal. No, that's terrific. Well, folks, thanks for joining us today. Those are some tips on how to get the most value out of your deal budget. I think my number one tip for today is be really, really good with relationships. There's just nothing that I've seen create more value on a deal, probably even than organization, than being really, really good with relationships. Because trust is the currency of deals. It's how they get done. And when you're really good with relationships, you're really good at creating trust. And that makes a huge difference. Jake, what's your number one thought from today?
I think my thought goes back to is like you are the one who maximizes the value of your deal budget.
Yep.
And it goes back to you and a lot of your actions. And, and that's where you need to recognize that you are a key piece of all of this, and you can make a deal, break a deal, make a deal very, very expensive. Then it doesn't have to be expensive. And you just basically, it's all on you, not all on you, but it is you who maximizes the value of your deal budget.
My wellness tip for today on doing deals and doing them well when it comes to your own wellness is have confidence to know the value of your own time. I mean, just right in that same vein, I'm a person who struggles a lot with imposter syndrome and the insecurity of, do I really bring that much value? And I work with a lot of, most business owners, particularly those that are really intelligent. They always struggle with that and that confidence deficit of, do I really create that much value? And you got to own that space. The reason that we are part of your deal team is because you create more value than we do.
Yeah.
and remembering that, bringing that confidence to the table, because it's your job to go kill it and kick some butt and take some names. So, well, thank you folks for joining us today. I really enjoyed talking to you with some practical tips about how to maximize the value of your deal budget. Please join us next time as we talk about how to understand the buyer's priorities. Thank you for joining us today. For future episodes, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And please check out our website at www.goforemanlaw.com/learning.